a marketing intelligence dashboard that essentially drives everything we do as an agency, sort of in this whole new world of sort of where data, creative, and brand storytelling all collides.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to ask, we've talked about different stories. Jeff, why don't we start with you, kind of reverse it up. Give us one of the stories where you've seen data impact a brand.
Yeah, I think a great one is just coming off of Nick's speech on Boost Mobile is, you know, the Project Switch campaign that we just saw was just very much, you know, founded in this idea of data and insights. You know, I recall some focus groups we did about, you know, in late 2016, where we started to really hear this idea from customers about these sort of pain points in the wireless category. And so we would hear directly from customers speaking a lot about their pain points, speaking about how they're sort of unhappy no matter where they are. They always feel ripped off. They feel they're confused about the pricing. They're worried about network speed and network quality and customer service. And we would hear these themes over and over. And we would get those data insights not only from focus groups, but we'll see them on social media and all those kind of things that Nick talked about. And those insights into those pain points directly drove this Project Switch campaign. That creative and the whole story around Project Switch came out of exactly what we were hearing from customers. And I think listening very deeply and very closely really inspired sort of the creative direction of Project Switch, which essentially, you know, within a year did some incredible things on the brand. And I think it's because it was so founded sort of in data and in the customer.
So, you know, you say the focus groups, was it enough to just hear that sentiment, or did you actually have to go out and prove that lots of people thought this way?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think because obviously with focus groups you have, you know, limited amount of people, but I think there was you know, from retail visits to what we were hearing in the field to doing social media listening and seeing the data there, and also seeing in competitive reviews how certain customers were maybe reacting to what was happening in the market too. So there's multiple data points that sort of led us to this theory that, you know what, everyone's unhappy and everyone's looking for, in a very snarky and cynical sort of world, everyone's looking for sort of a breath of relief. And those data touch points, they came from multiple places. They were sort of, yes, kind of started with the customer and focus groups, but then we're able to start to see it and hear it everywhere, especially in a bigger data platform like social media.
Great, thanks. Harold, tell a little bit about your insights here.
Yeah, for sure. One of the big things that probably happened last year across the state of Texas for Equality Texas was the bathroom bill. I'm not sure if a lot of us have heard about that, but of course having to reach out to people who don't necessarily, or who don't, I guess, aren't categorized as LGBT, and have them either make phone calls or activate specifically for our issues. So what we've learned that's really effective from sort of national research is really focusing on shared values. And so an example of that would be, do you think it's okay to fire someone because they're gay, right? Or I can say, do you believe that every American, or in this case Texan, deserves the right to earn a living, right? So that shared value is something that everyone would say, of course I do, right? And so with transgender issues, other things, children being safe in schools, when we took a look at some of our Facebook membership, it doesn't actually overlap with our email list, right? Not very much, which you would kind of think it would, but it doesn't. So we have a lot of parents. And so there are parents who are reaching out to understand their kids and how they could support their children. So being able to appeal to what we call mama bears and papa bears, and that need and want to defend your children, everyone can relate to. So having someone who is a parent get up and speak, who, you know, isn't gay but they have a child, you can identify and sympathize with that person. And so we sort of use that to move people into action. At the same time, understanding some national data in terms of voting. And so we need Republicans, right? But there's a group that does some research there and kind of allows us to identify Republicans who may be sensitive to LGBT issues. So one of the fun little things, I was not the data researcher on this one, but one of the fun facts, if someone is Republican and likes NASCAR, they're probably not sensitive to our issue, right? But there were a few things and a few ways that we could identify to do some call bank issues, to call these folks who are sensitive to our issues and say, are you willing to make a phone call to your representative, right? And then getting hundreds of people to do that every single day to ultimately, you know, have a good narrative in terms of shared values, identify people who might be sensitive, get to move them to action, and in the end, you know, defeat the bill.
Great, thanks. Gary.
Sure. So, we're a label company, and up until a few years ago, you would have to go to your local, office supply store, Staples, pick up a pack of labels and print it yourself. And so we knew our customers pretty well. We knew, they were mainly office professional type people. And then we decided, as this gig economy kind of started up with your Etsy sellers and people trying to make crafts and make a living that way, we launched a custom print service. And we thought for sure that we would kind of skew more toward our normal customers. But as we started launching this, we realized that it was mainly small businesses, these Etsy sellers who wanted to really have a custom printed look. So we had to kind of change our marketing strategy based on the data and who was actually coming to our print service. So we modified everything, based on this new strategy, and we've been pretty successful with it.
So what was the, so when you would kind of personify your customer before versus after, what is the difference there?
So before we had more of like the moms, kind of printing stuff at work, maybe for a birthday party or like a mailing invitations. And with this custom printing service, we saw more of the small businesses, the small sellers, the soap makers, that kind of thing. So it was really interesting to see what the data actually told us based, our gut kind of told us one thing, but the data told us another.
And what specifically was it in the data that was telling you? Was it just volume, or was there something else?
Well, volume, definitely. We found that people who used our custom printing service were printing a lot more and on a regular basis. So we were able to change our targeting to affect that. And also, too, we're selling directly to the consumer, so we're able to get a lot more data insights. Rather than at POS, we might get some data, and it's rather old. And now we're selling direct to consumer, so we get that data back fast and can make decisions on that rather quickly.
Great, thanks. So I want to go into what are the changes? So you've kind of described, hey, there was this neat story. What have the results of this insight or that been in terms of how you're approaching the market, organizing marketing, whatever? Harold, you want to jump in?
Yeah, for sure. So what we've been looking at, we did some focus groups to kind of understand. So again, last year there were 24 bad bills. We were able to defeat 23 of them, right? And then when we went out and we talked about it, I feel like I've been on the board for a little over a year. The marketing committee has been in existence for, let's say, 6 months, right? And then one of the things, it's like we kind of have an awareness issue. We've done all of this work. We're the little engine that could, the organization that does the right thing because it's the right thing to do, but we don't necessarily get out and claim those wins or the other organizations do, right? So from a nonprofit perspective, list building is important. Also getting donations is important as well to continue doing the work that we're doing. And so in some of the focus groups and interviews that we've done, we ask people, where are we different? Where do we stand out? And one of the things is about being from Texas, right? And there's if you know anyone from Texas, we are very proud to be from Texas, right? Unusually so, and usually more than individuals from other states. And at the same time, again, the folks that we're talking to is way broader than ourselves, and it should be. So aggregating those two things together, we've partnered with a creative agency, Greatest Common Factory here in town, trying to understand how do we bring that to life in a way that speaks to our base and our supporters, and also speaks to Texans as a whole from a shared value perspective. So our campaign was supposed to launch actually before this. As you all know, sometimes they get delayed a few weeks because things didn't work out the way you thought. So I can't kind of release, what our new tagline and slogan and campaign is just yet. But we aggregated shared values with Texas and understanding that we're speaking broader than just to, the LGBT population.
And one thing you mentioned when we were talking earlier was this idea of there's the branding side and there's the story side, but it was almost a philosophical change that occurred within Equality Texas, right? So you said at one point the organization was very reactive, and then the change was, hey, we've got to figure out how to be more proactive. Do you care to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, that was when we asked people what we were good at. It was responding and reacting, right? And I think a lot of times it's like, oh, where are we getting attacked from next and needing to, respond to it. And then we have to do that because you never know when it's going to happen. But at the same time, to be successful, again, we have to have people who don't fall into the LGBTQ category. How do we do consensus building? How do we recognize where those people are, start developing relationships, changing hearts and minds up front? So, of course, we're good at defense, but if, we switch to offense just a little, then maybe it won't be so hard to do that down the road.
Great, thanks. Jeff, care to elaborate on sort of the impact long-term that some of these insights have had?
Yeah, certainly. I think one thing that's interesting for me, being in advertising for so long, is what's really changed versus 10 years ago is we would invest so much in that sort of that campaign, that creative idea, that all the assets needed for that, and essentially we'd launch it and then forget about it, right? It's all this time spent up front, put that out in market, and sort of cross your fingers, hope for the best, see how it performs. Maybe 3 months later, right? And then sort of, that was sort of the process you would take. And these days is like the first day of the campaign feels like the first day of everything, right? So we actually need to spend as much time as possible while we're live, while we're in market, being nimble, being ready to change creative, being ready to look at testing results, sort of being ready to always be dynamic in sort of the way we're in market. And so that's a very different way of working in a creative and advertising kind of sense, right? So it's a whole new world on that side. And a good example, again, speaking to Boost Mobile and the Project Switch campaign, is that even though we've seen incredible success, we're tracking every single day. There's a national quant study to hundreds of consumers a day, giving us feedback on not only our creative, but the competitors' creative as well. And we're sort of tracking that along with every campaign. We're getting that data every week, about every single day, and seeing how we're doing. And an example is one of the metrics we're seeing after being in market and live is we're seeing generally great creative testing results and great performance, but we're starting to, now that we're a year plus into the campaign, starting to see a sort of tired of seeing metric. So that tired of seeing metric that we're starting to see, we're like, oh, okay, people are looking for a bit of an evolution, a bit of a freshness. It's impacting how we're doing creative. So as we work onto the next set of production and scripts, we're looking at setting them in a slightly different location in the store, looking to give them a slightly fresh, different look, making just small tweaks and evolutions based on essentially what we're seeing as live in market testing all the time.
Great, thanks. Carrie, some of the downstream implications of this insight you had.
Downstream implications. So we've definitely had to change how we market. We found, now that we have all these insights, now what do we do with them? So we're figuring out, from a promotion standpoint, like what do we do and how do we change and how do we evolve? And I think as a department, that's been a big challenge too. Now that we are getting all of this data, what do we do with it and how do we act on it?
And you said there were some pretty significant shakeups within the marketing department itself, right?
Yeah, now that we are, because we've been traditionally a brick and mortar, retailer selling to other retailers, and now that we're direct to consumer, we've had to change our way of thinking and our departments and become more cross-functional, which is a big shift for a legacy brand to change and evolve, based on that.
So I'm going to shift gears just a touch, and that is, we've talked about some sort of a data story impacting the brand. I want to talk about how do you kind of think about data, right? We've got examples of, hey, there's survey, and there's focus groups, and there's behavioral data. Give me a little perspective on how each of you think about data in general, and then what are some of the sources that you tend to go to and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, I feel like 10 or 15 years ago, we were just like, there's not enough data. We don't know enough. And now it's the polar opposite. We're drowning in data. We have too much, not that there's ever too much data, but I find marketing departments, brand managers, agencies are drowning in data from many sources. And even just look at social media data alone. I mean, you can be combing through the depth of data available to you in social alone that gives you just so much potential insight. But the problem is we don't technically know how to deal with all of that data. So For us, we tackle that multiple ways. First of all, we are really interested in all of the data touch points. So we are interested in quant surveys, we're interested in focus groups, we're interested in what social media listening and social media metrics are telling us, we're interested in Google Analytics data, we're interested in ad testing data, we're e-commerce data, Amazon data. I mean, we're interested in every single one of those touch points, plus those syndicated studies like GfK MRI or things like that, right? So we're really interested in all of those data touch points. But then the question is, like, what do we pull out of that? How do we use it, right? So for us, we have a data visualization tool that we call SES Marketing Intelligence that brings all of that data into a single point and works to try to visualize that data, to try to find the insights, and then use humans to try to discover the insights. Like, what are we actually seeing here? Why did website do this at the same time that media did this and social was showing this? Oftentimes it's perplexing. You get into these interesting conversations. Once you're able to put them side by side, you're able to say, wow, this doesn't make sense, why? And often you're then doing some more research or some more testing. But at least you have your entire sort of marketing department, your entire creative agency, they're all then thinking a very different way. They're using the data to get smarter, to get better, to get more effective at moving the needle for the brand.
Wonderful. Harold?
For me personally, we all kind of know this. Quantitative tells you what to look, qualitative tells you what it means. And so a lot of times we get, recently, this project, we're redoing a recruiting website. So I tend to do internal communications and culture professionally. So, and then there's a lot of talk about, well, the number one thing people want to do when they go to a recruiting site is what, right? Search for jobs is what everyone tells you. So one of the things I like to do usually, I love big Post-its and I love to have very sort of tactical things for people to draw. So we have these conversations about what should be on a recruiting site. And then I give them a giant Post-it. I'm like, here's a marker, design your perfect page. Right? And so we have about 20 people in the room in groups of 2, and then we start going through, and about a third of the group actually forgot to put a section to search for jobs on the page itself. Right? And what did that tell me? That these people aren't actually going to this website to search for jobs, or that secondary or not even a primary thought, that what they want to is to see themselves working there, to see the people they'll be working with, to see the environment. So all the marketing people and the data people were like, no, put a Google bar and let them search. And I'm like, well, if a third didn't even think about putting search on there, it couldn't matter that much, right? And it helps with data prioritization and organization. So I think marrying the two, but for the type of work that I typically do, the focus group has always yielded the what, the how, to get to the emotional part and allowed us to sort of test and retest things as we go through.
I love that, that the insights you can get from exercises like that are incredible. Like, I think, again, as we're drowning in data and we have so many data points, those customer conversations, those consumer focus groups, those opportunities to speak to people, try to get inside their head, it gives the why behind the reasons, and that helps so much in finding the insights in the data. So I agree with the process. Look wide at all the data, and then talk to customers, and talk to consumers and try to understand why that data is what it is.
Yeah, I think up until recently, we relied really heavy on focus groups. That was our main source of getting data back. But we found now in this digital age, like, it takes so long to get this data back. And by the time we get it back, sentiment has changed and things have evolved. So we just brought in, I know we're behind the times, a data scientist who now, like, on the regular, every day is telling us where we're at and what people are doing. And we're reacting on that data, not real time, but, fairly close.
Yeah, I know. Personal anecdote, I know we did done some work with online, like, moderated discussion groups, right? Which is sort of like a takeoff on the focus group concept. The wonderful thing there is that we're asking people to actually type in their responses to, say, 20 questions. And at the end of that, you've got now 1,000 pages of data that you can mine and validate and test and kind of try out. And that's been really a fun one that we've done as well. What, I guess, Jeff, I'm going to go back to, you talked about, the challenge of kind of doing creative and almost in real time, right? You're constantly on, which leads me to a question to think about AI, right? Is this where AI comes in? Is this its use, or is there something else you're doing?
I think it is. I think, It was interesting to hear. I listened to the YouTube CEO's talk yesterday at South by, and she talked about hiring 10,000 community managers essentially to review content because they are implementing or have implemented such sort of a successful AI and machine learning platform to go find this bad content, but they needed humans then to also review it. I think it's a similar process here. AI and machine learning can do some amazing thing for us. It can help us take all of this data and start to try to help us go find what that data means a little bit, help us visualize that data for us. I mean, at a media level too, using certain certain tools, media, AI and machine learning is helping us optimize media to target groups and things like that, right? So it does an incredible tool at a number of things in a data space, especially when we have so much data. That's where it's most important. We can say, okay, there's so much data, like AI, machine learning, help us start to understand where some of that data can go. But then we need humans ultimately to review what the machines are doing for us and make things like key insights or getting inside a consumer's head as to the why is something that I don't think AI and machine learning is ever going to do. I do think in dynamic creative, it can help us in the sense of programmatic creative that's dynamic and creative messaging is really interesting. So this point we're getting to platforms where maybe the creative team is writing 20, 30, 40 headlines, dumping that into a system that's defining how some of those headlines with some personalization makes that ad more relevant to, let's say, a mobile user in a particular location at a particular time. So that's another way that I think AI machine learning is starting to sort of insert itself into the creative process. It's really giving us more testing opportunities on creative and more personalization and targeting that to specific users.
Wonderful. Harold, Carrie, how are you guys thinking about AI at this point?
We're using a lot of PI and AI in terms of frequency. So we know if you order round labels, you're going to come back in 30 days and order more round labels. So we're really using that to our advantage to predict when you're going to need the next refresh and making sure that we're sending you relevant content right then. So that's really helped us. And in the past year, we've seen double-digit growth, just based on AI and PI, and being able to leverage a vendor to, do that quite quickly.
Great. And so that's for kind of content and recommendations and next step kind of stuff?
Yeah, we're really doing it as more right now, just recommended offers, like you bought this, you might like this, and then also don't forget to reorder. And then we're also using it for frequency based. If you order 4 times, we're going to send you a special something for being a valued customer. So we're trying to figure out other ways that we can leverage that within our marketing.
Wonderful.
And for our organization, we're really in our infancy, and even doing data and understanding our membership, as it is today. So we're growing up. We're kind of in that phase. So we haven't even started to tackle that yet.
Wonderful. We have one more thing you're going to
I thought of one other area that we're definitely seeing AI helping us, and that's in consumer segmentation. So doing these wide studies, doing a lot of psychographic questions, things like that, and the software is starting to help us maybe understand these different groups. We helped relaunch the BlackBerry brand, big challenge last year. A very lapsed brand, a lot of issues around that brand, some loyal followers, but we helped launch the new Key One phone about a year ago. Great device, great tech reviews, doing really well. And we had to go on gut initially about target audience. We thought, okay, it's probably that, we called them the builder. It's probably that Gen X, executive who used to have a BlackBerry 10 plus years ago and is like, oh, yeah, I could use a keyboard again on this great Android platform now. And we started there and went from there. But then both through the advertising data, social media listening, as well as some global studies that we performed, we really found that there were other groups. Like AI helped us discover in consumer segmentation there was a number of really interesting groups who were actually potentially attracted to the brand and interested in the brand, and allowed us to then adjust media buys and adjust media targeting to hit those targets. And again, all wouldn't have been possible without sort of a software AI engine helping us to understand these psychographics and what groups they might be.
Wonderful. I see Steve standing up in the back, which means we're getting close to time for questions at least.
Yes.
So.
Any questions? I wanted to ask a little bit about operationally, how you, if you have any tips or ideas for how to get the data and the creative teams really to talk to one another throughout the process. That seems to have been traditionally one of the greatest challenges for leveraging data in terms of creative. Is there anything that you've learned internally about how to get those two worlds to talk better together and to work to inform one another's work?
For us, that's a great question. We had the same question at the time because we had this theory of relaunching a new agency that was needed. And we felt like it needed to be tackled because historically, yeah, creative teams are either in the dark somewhat or not fully engaged in data. So we launched in our agency what we called a brand pod platform, where essentially once a week, everyone from various departments and different silos and different marketing channels, people from social media, from content, from creative, from media, all get together and sit in a room and they start with the data platform. So you got the creatives at the table once a week, starting at a visualization and data platform and actually having a conversation about, okay, what's working, what did we learn in the last week, what could we change? And the creatives are at the table, the creative directors at the table, engaged in that data, interested. And so that made a huge difference because it just sort of formalized that creative to data learning.
Are you finding that it goes both ways? I mean, I think traditionally, we tend to, because we're digital, we're very data-oriented, we're always wanting creative to respect the data more, but are you finding that creative is helping to inform the data and helping to come up with what are the next questions to ask? What are the next things to look for?
So I will say for us, our creative team was actually in on the focus groups. When we were doing calls, they were sitting in the room, and so we were on our cell phones texting and saying, ask this question, what about this, at the same time. So we all heard the same thing, and if there's something we wanted to check right there, the designer and some of the staff and the copywriters were all in the room listening.
And the creatives are invested in the process.
Right. And we all heard the same thing, so it's not something that Harold's asking them to do again, or anything like that, or it's also not a personal preference, because sometimes it's that preference that comes in and they think, well, this is just your preference for how this should be, and it's like, well, actually, no, I keep dropping this sheet of paper, I have no idea why. And so then I think they understand that, and they heard it right from, the mouth of the person being interviewed, and they had an opportunity also to ask, so people support what they help to create, right, at the same time, so I think it comes back to that.
I love that question so much. It reminds me of that scene in Mad Men where the research, you guys ever see that? The head of research walks into Don Draper's office and hands him a research report and he just puts it straight in the garbage. Doesn't even look at the world.
She also had a German accent.
Yeah, that's right, which is perfect.
And had worked for the Wehrmacht.
Yeah, it was perfect. Yeah. It's amazing now, right? Because the CEO now at the brand is like, just show me the numbers, show me the data. And it's a bit sad on a brand storytelling level. Like, it can be challenging, right? We used to be able to build these big emotional brand stories that would run a long time, and now it's like, what did we do last week, and how is it working? And so it's really impacting things. But I think the data scientists really appreciate when creatives care, and there's a partnership, I think, happening now between data and creative that we never saw before. That is allowing us to really move brand needles on brands, like in Boost Mobile's case.
Yeah. I know in our experience, what we're finding is that creatives, once they start to get some feedback on you did this and it really worked, then they're going, give me more, give me more, give me more, right? Because they want there's sort of this inner tension between, the artist and the wanting to really make that impact. And when they say, hey, my art can make an impact, that seems to be this level of validation that I know our creative teams just adore, right?
Well, yeah, speaking as a creative, we're total whores for approval. I mean, that's how you got journalists to start blogging, is once they started seeing the kind of feedback they were getting and realized people are actually reading me.
Right.
Morgan, panel, thanks very much. That was great.
Thank you.